something has shifted around California's leadership, not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that's now impossible to ignore. The pressure surrounding Gavin Newsom isn't coming from a single scandal or headline moment. It's emerging from something more consequential, growing questions about governance, capacity, and whether the systems beneath the politics are starting to strain. What makes this moment different isn't partisan outrage, but accumulation. Court rulings, budget projections, housing data, and local government pushback have begun converging. Nationally, California is no longer just a policy experiment, it's increasingly treated as a test case. The question isn't about personal fault, but whether institutional confidence is quietly being tested. Within the first moments of this shift, one issue rises above the rest: credibility. Not in speeches or campaigns, but in outcomes. As reported across mainstream outlets, California's ambitions remain expansive, yet implementation is facing friction. Housing targets lag, costs rise, and timelines stretch. When outcomes fall behind promises, scrutiny naturally follows. This is where pressure forms not from opposition attacks, but from constraints. Budgets are finite. Courts intervene. Cities assert autonomy. Each of these limits narrows executive flexibility. What once felt like political momentum now encounters structural resistance, and that resistance doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, slowly, until it becomes visible. Consider housing, a centerpiece of California's policy identity. Legislative action has been aggressive, but results remain uneven. Audits and reporting show gaps between targets and actual construction. Local governments cite funding and zoning realities. Detention isn't ideological, it's logistical. And logistics are where leadership narratives are most vulnerable. At the same time, budget pressures have re-entered the conversation. After years of surplus-driven expansion, projections have tightened. Programs launched during stronger fiscal periods now face sustainability questions. This doesn't imply failure, but it does force recalibration. When recalibration meets political branding, friction tends to surface. National observers are paying attention because California often signals what comes next elsewhere. If large-scale policy initiatives encounter execution limits here, that matters beyond state lines. It raises broader questions about scale, governance, and the balance between ambition and administrative capacity. These are system-level concerns, not personality-driven ones. There's also a growing city-state dynamic. Mayors and local officials, particularly in large metro areas, are voicing concerns about enforcement timelines and resource gaps. This isn't rebellion, but negotiation. Still, negotiation itself signals pressure. When alignment weakens, governance becomes more complex, and complexity invites scrutiny. Here's what's often missing from daily coverage. Pressure doesn't require collapse to be real. It exists when decisions narrow, when margins shrink, and when every move carries higher consequence. In that environment, leadership is judged less by vision and more by coordination. That's a subtle but profound shift. Midway through this story, it's worth noting something about the audience following it closely. Serious political viewers don't watch for spectacle. They watch to understand systems before they visibly change. And when systems show stress, debate naturally follows. So where do you think this pressure is actually coming from? Policy design, execution limits, or political expectations? What complicates matters further is timing. California is approaching another election cycle, and national visibility remains high. Every policy outcome now carries interpretive weight. Supporters frame long-term vision. Critics emphasize short-term strain. The truth often sits between those poles, inside the mechanics of governance. Courts have also played a quiet role. Judicial interventions on regulatory scope and enforcement authority have introduced delays and revisions. This isn't unusual, but it adds another layer of constraint. When executive plans intersect with judicial review, timelines change, and public perception often follows. None of this suggests a single turning point. Instead, it reflects convergence. Housing, budgets, courts, local governance, and national attention are aligning in ways that compress decision space. Pressure grows not because something broke, but because fewer options remain frictionless. What's especially notable is how the conversation has shifted tone. Less about ambition, more about feasibility. Less about announcement, more about follow-through. That tonal shift is often the first sign that political narratives are entering a more demanding phase. For California, this moment matters because the state's identity is tied to governance capacity. When that capacity is questioned even quietly, it reshapes how policies are received, funded, and defended. Confidence isn't lost overnight, but it can erode through accumulation. Nationally, this matters because California often anchors policy debates. If execution challenges persist, they influence how similar proposals are evaluated elsewhere. Governors, legislators, and federal agencies all watch these outcomes closely, even when they don't say so publicly. There's also a human dimension beneath the policy language. Voters experience outcomes, not frameworks. Housing availability, cost of living, service delivery — these translate abstract governance questions into daily realities. When alignment falters, political patience tends to shorten. At this stage, the pressure facing California's leadership isn't about survival. It's about adaptation. Can systems adjust without losing coherence? Can ambition recalibrate without appearing retreatist? These are governance questions that don't lend themselves to slogans. As this period unfolds, the most important signals won't come from speeches, but from adjustments. Budget revisions, implementation changes, legal settlements, local coordination. These are the quiet indicators of how pressure is managed rather than denied. Ultimately, this story isn't about one individual. It's about whether large-scale governance can sustain momentum under real-world constraints. California is testing that question in real time, and the results will echo beyond the state. The reason this moment matters now is simple. Transitions are easier before pressure peaks. Once systems harden, choices narrow, what happens next will be shaped less by intention and more by response. And as with most consequential political shifts, the clearest answers won't arrive in a single headline but in the patterns that follow.